Everybody, Alex Meller here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. It's both an example of a growing and worrying cybersecurity trend, and it tells a story pretty well of how it could hit you closer to home than you think. So let me start with some basics. On May 7th, just a few days ago, attackers, cybercriminals, got into the computer systems of Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline is a company that operates around 5,500 miles of fuel pipelines that originate in Houston and supply almost half of the fuel consumed on the East Coast, about 2.5 million barrels a day. So what is ransomware? The idea of ransomware is that you're a cybercriminal and you get into somebody's computer systems. And you could do any number of destructive things, but you'd really like to get paid, so you want to do something reversible. So what you do is you encrypt all their files, and you leave a scary note that says, send me some money in the following way, or you won't get these files back. And just a kind of everyday scenario, let's say you've been working on a big presentation for work. You think you could get a promotion if you do a good job. Somebody gets into your computer and encrypts your presentation the morning of when it was supposed to be given. So now you're under a lot of pressure. You don't have time to do a new presentation. Maybe you would just pay some money to get it back in hopes of moving on with your life. And that's what these cyber criminals are hoping, that whatever files were encrypted, you are inconvenienced enough that you'll just pay them for the decryption key to get on with your life, and they can run off with the money. So in the case of Colonial, this ransomware attack actually crippled their pipeline. It mostly hasn't been running for the past 4 days. If you live maybe in North or South Carolina, you might be getting to the point where you could go to the gas station and they just don't have any gas. And I wouldn't panic too much, and this is probably partly driven by panic that this is a situation as trucks are coming and people are doing things. And to some degree, the problem is just that everyone's going to the gas station with extra tanks of gas, and it's the toilet paper problem again. But it's a real thing that a lot of fuel is being delivered, and it's not being delivered now, and it's because Colonial doesn't have access to all these files it needed to keep that pipeline running. So ransomware, unfortunately, is becoming more and more common. It has increased in frequency, I believe 300% over the past year. There have been a number of examples. A lot of school districts have been hit by ransomware. State governments, I believe the city of Baltimore was hit by a ransomware attack, and that unfortunately came out of taxpayer wallets to fix. And just in general, in the United States, a lot of these things are handled by private companies. A lot of these are small entities doing their own cybersecurity. And there's a lot of juicy targets for cyber criminals, and this has sort of been figured out, and there's more and more of these attacks. So just a couple things here about interesting geopolitical angles on this particular attack, and it explains some odd statements you might have seen. It's believed that this attack was perpetrated by the Dark Side gang, which operates out of Eastern Europe. They put out this funny statement like, we're not trying to cause trouble, we just want to make money. It's rather odd, right, for a bunch of criminals to put out a statement like this. And it's often true of cyber attacks that sometimes they're criminals, and sometimes they're criminals that are vaguely in league with the national government that would like to do some dirt in a way that they can pretend that they didn't do the dirt. So it's very possible that this Dark Side gang, you don't always know when you're doing one of these attacks whose system you got onto. You might have just been combing the web, kind of hit the jackpot in a negative way, and is feeling more pressure than they really wanted right now. Even if they were in league with the Russian government, if the Russian government didn't sign off on this one, they might be in pretty serious trouble on both sides right now. They're getting a lot of scrutiny from very high levels of law enforcement. Versus, very often ransomware might not even be reported. If you hit some mid-sized company, they might have been very embarrassed. They might have paid you to hush it up. You just get paid and life goes on, and you don't have to deal with any of these headaches. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about practical advice. Like you could be a victim of ransomware at home or at work. What are some things you can do to be prepared outside of the obvious, good password practices, two-factor authentication, standard stuff we don't have time for? It's good to have an explicit plan. If you were to get ransomware, you'll be really stressed out. You want that plan, written down on paper. It happens, and it's kind of funny if it wasn't such a bummer. You get hit with some particular kind of cyber attack, and you had a great plan written down, but you can't get into your plan because it's in your electronic files that you now can't get into because of the cyber attack. Just in general, anything you can do to back up important files would help you get out of this kind of situation. If you're a big company and you can have a plan to just invoice everything on paper like 100 years ago, it's going to really save your life in a situation like this. And there's even some examples of people that got hit by big ransomware attacks. And, it was really a mess that they were invoicing on paper, but actually you look really good in that scenario, having that game plan. And maybe your stock price, even goes up after a while because you've demonstrated how thorough and well prepared you were. So, have a plan, have it on paper, have everything backed up, especially if you can back it all up on paper in one way or another. And then finally, there's some really interesting negotiation wrinkles. As I mentioned, these kind of cyber criminals might not know who it was they were attacking, which makes for a really interesting negotiation. So if they don't know if they hit just somebody's kind of private server they were using for fun, and that person's probably willing to pay nothing. They don't know if they've devastated a Fortune 500 company somehow and they're willing to pay a lot. And so this is just a really unique negotiation situation. And I think everybody agrees you probably shouldn't pay from a practical standpoint, and you definitely shouldn't pay from a moral standpoint. But if you find yourself in this position and you're negotiating about how much to pay, there are experienced people who can probably help you do a better job with this than you would do on your own. But just in general, there's no replacement for basic cybersecurity practices, and there's a lot of other people putting that information out there. So I hope all that helps clarify was probably a landmark cyber attack, and that's unfortunately affecting people in a very, very day-to-day way.